84 in Waco. Thank you, Ted. This is Sam Kahn, theathletic.com, covers college football and covers it incredibly well. Joins us on 365 Sports with Craig and Paul, and I'm David Smoak. So, Sam, I saw that earlier this afternoon, David Hicks, a star, big-time player from Katy Paetow, made the commitment to A&M. Your thoughts about yet another high-level defensive player for the Aggies?
Boy, there aren't too many programs recruiting defensive linemen much better than Texas A&M at this point, is there? They did obviously a bang-up job last year with 7 top 100 national recruits on the defensive line, and you add a 5-star like David Hicks, and it just continues. So what it does is it's going to help Texas A&M continue to be really competitive in the SEC West, because if you can rush the passer and you can stop the run, then you're going to be in good shape. I'm sure some A&M fans would also love to see some high-level offensive recruits commit to Texas A&M, given what the Aggies have done on the offensive side of the ball in the last few weeks. But, hey, you take the wins where you can get them. So, big ups to Jimbo Fisher and his staff for pulling that one off.
Is this why, even though it may look from the outside like Jimbo Fisher is, feeling some heat, that if he keeps getting recruits like this, then they're not going to do anything about that?
Yeah, that's the thing is, ultimately, if you continue to recruit at the level that A&M did the last cycle, and if this can trigger them, I mean, right now they were kind of in the 20s. This has been a little bit of a down year, comparatively speaking. They're a little bit behind pace on this recruiting class, but they're still, of the guys they do have a lot of really nice blue chip prospects in their 2023 class. But if you can just recruit and stack classes the way they have the last 4 years, eventually the talent is going to take over. I think we can say what we want about their offense, and there's certainly no shortage of criticism there, and a lot of it warranted. But at some point, you're going to hit enough of those guys that you're going to be good enough to do something of significance in college football and the national.
Sam, how surprised are you by the offensive struggles?
A little bit, mainly because I think they've probably had more problems up front than I thought they would.
Yeah.
The offensive line was something that gave them problems last year, but they started true freshmen up front. So you kind of understood that. There were some growing pains there, but with 3 returning starters, virtually the entire right side of the offensive line back, you figure they'd be better. Now, some of that is impacted by injuries. They didn't have their starting center for the first 2 weeks of the season. He came back, Bryce Foster came back against Miami, and was still very much playing his way back into shape, you could tell. So some of that obviously can be attributed to that, but I certainly didn't think Haynes King was going to look as rough as he did right out of the gate. He didn't take care of the ball very well, and we certainly saw that last year when he started, the one start that he had, but it was one game, so it's hard to extrapolate that small sample size to say, oh, he's got a problem taking care of the ball, because we only really saw that one time. Max Johnson has given them a little bit of extra, certainly, at least in terms of taking care of the ball. But the other thing I think that a lot of us undersold nationally is missing Isaiah Spiller. Yeah. Their run game is really good, and Devon A-Chain is a tremendously talented running back. But having that 1-2 punch the last 2 years has really, really been integral to their offensive success, because Spiller was one of those guys that even when things weren't blocked perfectly up front, he could make it happen. His vision and his footwork, his cutting ability was so good. And so if there was nothing to be had, he could still get you a few yards. And Devon A-Chain, I started to see some of that last week against Arkansas, but he hasn't been the go-to guy, and this is now his first year being the go-to guy, and they don't really have someone of his caliber right after him. They've got some really talented guys, but nobody's done it at that level. So all that to say that some of these issues probably could have been foreseen, but overall, I would have thought they'd be a lot farther ahead of schedule offensively than they have been.
How many combined Big 12 conference losses will the 2 teams that play for the Big 12 championship have this season?
Golly, could it be as much as 6? Possibly. Could we be looking at 2-3 lost teams playing for the Big 12 championship? I mean, it certainly isn't, outside of the realm of possibility. This is a deep league with no easy wins anymore. Kansas has kind of blown that out of the water with their 4-0 start. Max Olson and I were talking on our podcast this morning. We were trying to figure out who is the worst team in the Big 12 conference right now. It's kind of hard to tell. I guess right now maybe my pick would be West Virginia, but even though they just came off a win over Virginia Tech.
Same,
so they're not a bad team, and they also, the other challenge is sussing out which is the best team in the league. Oklahoma a week ago, I think Max and I were talking about, are they a playoff team? And then they turn around and lose to K-State. K-State, of course, had just lost to Tulane, but then comes up with a big win. And then we got the big game with Baylor and Oklahoma State this weekend, which I think will tell us a lot about how that race is going to shape up down the stretch.
Did your opinion of Texas Tech and or Texas change after that game this weekend?
Not a ton, no. I knew that game was going to be trouble for Texas. I mean, you guys know, when you go down to Lubbock on a Saturday, anything can happen. It can get a little hairy. And this Texas Tech team that Joey McGuire took over, he inherited a good roster. For all the struggles that Matt Wells and his staff had, the one thing they did do was manage the roster well and bring in a lot of depth via the transfer portal. So he took over a team. I mean, heck, they went to a bowl game last year and beat Mississippi State. So clearly he wasn't taking over a bad situation from a roster standpoint. So you take that into account. You look at the staff he hired, a veteran defensive coordinator, a lot of Texas high school ties. You've got a rising star offensive coordinator. I certainly wasn't shocked to see Texas Tech upset them. At the same token, I knew Texas might have some trouble. They're beat up at some key spots. You don't have Quinn Ewers, Hudson Card limping around. You lost Xavier Worthy, in the first half of that game. You didn't have DeMar Van Overshown for a half. So they're not necessarily walking wounded across the board, but they are in some really, really important spots. And I know some Texas fans maybe want to jump off the deep end after that one, but I'm not there. I don't think this is a reason to panic. I still look at this Texas team, despite that loss, as a team that looks to me like they're playing at a higher level than they were last year. Now, that makes these next few weeks really important. They've got to win this game against West Virginia this week. Obviously, how they fare against Red River, that's a rivalry game. You never know. But they're going to have to bounce back in a hurry, because the one thing that is concerning if you're a Texas fan is you coughed up a double-digit lead. And what was the thing that really triggered their 6-game losing streak last year? It was coughing a double digit.
Sam, like you said, they could slide pretty quickly if they don't beat the Mountaineers. But does the Quinn Ewers injury give them mulligan's probably not the right word, but it just feels like that's going to be the kind of mulligan in a way of like, no matter what they do, it's like, yeah, well, Quinn Ewers is injured. And I know he might be back sooner rather than later, but do you get that sense at all?
Yeah, I think so, because I think we all saw what he looked like against Alabama in the short time he was in the game. I mean, there's a difference throwing the ball downfield with Quinn Ewers than there is in Hudson Card. Hudson's good in the short and intermediate game, but Quinn is a better downfield passer, and that is so integral to Steve Sarkisian's offense. So much of what they do well. We guys remember what that Alabama offense looked like in 2020. Obviously, it's a lot better players across the board, but Sark likes to throw it downfield, and Quinn's the better guy for that. And the other thing is as admirably as Hudson Card has performed, again, he's limping around. He was noticeably limping in the second half of that game. He was noticeably limping against UTSA, and still, to his credit, taking off and running when the field would open up. So that's a difficult situation to be in for them, for sure. And again, they lost Worthy, and then they also lost, and we don't really talk about this one, but they lost Isaiah Nair at the start of the year, who was a transfer from Wyoming, who was going to be another deep threat for them. So you're down Worthy, you're down Nair. You don't really have a guy that can stretch the field, nor do you have the quarterback who you thought you were going to stretch the field with.
Yeah, and I don't, for Texas fans, I don't mean mulligan in a bad way. It's just like it's very clear like they're not 100%. So even with the struggles, I know they want better, but it's like, yeah, but we don't have this guy who makes everything, really go the way we want it to. So just kind of an interesting dynamic there right now as they deal with some struggles. But you had a nice piece, Sam, in The Athletic on Joey McGuire, Texas Tech, their mindset when it comes to going forward on fourth downs. I know there's some Dave Aranda mentions, some lessons McGuire learned at Baylor as far as, going forward on fourth down and that aggressiveness. What did you kind of learn throughout that piece, and what were some of the highlights for you in writing it?
Yeah, I'm glad that we finally got to do this, because I've actually been wanting to do this topic for a while, ever since Baylor started having so much success last year. And I asked Dave Aranda about this at the Texas High School Coaches Convention, because I'll never forget his first year at Texas. And Dave, I think I went back and looked it up and saw a tweet about you being a little bit exasperated by Dave punting on the Texas 30-yard line on fourth down in the first year that it a loss in 2020. I felt the same way, Dave. I was like, please tell me Dave Aranda's not one of these guys who puts deep on the plus side, because I'm very much an advocate for going for it on fourth down, certainly in the opponent's territory. But to me, with Aranda, another sign of his willingness to learn, evolve, and not necessarily get stuck in whatever it is that he's learned for however long he's been coaching. A lot of coaches, it's hard to do that. It's hard to admit, hey, I didn't get this right. I didn't do this right. And that 2020 season was a lot of hard lessons for Aranda. And just was one of them is hey, I've got to take a different approach to what I do as an offensive football team and what I do strategically in game. And when Joey was there with them, they sat in on all these sessions with championship analytics that they do every week. And Dave Aranda and his staff had them every week, and Joey loved it. And so when he took the job at Texas Tech, he's like, hey, I'm going to incorporate this into my program. And I thought it was critical to Texas Tech being able to upset Texas. So the thing, I think the number that stood out to me the most, other than them going for a fourth down and getting it 6 of 8 times, was the fact that Texas was on the field for 23 extra plays after fourth down conversion. But Texas Tech ran 100 plays to Texas' 60, and Texas defense wore down in large part because a quarter of those 100 plays, or almost a quarter of those 100 plays, came after fourth down conversions. That is a heck of a anecdote to look at to see how Texas Tech was able to pull that upset.
Sam Kahn, theathletic.com with us, Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Again, appreciate his time as well. Now, when you look at other teams, and you mentioned this, there may be a team, who knows? Because it was always pretty much, and I know we can make the joke about Kansas and Texas, but there was always this, there's somebody and then somebody else falls apart. But who would you say right now, or will this weekend give us a better look at who are the top 5 or 6 teams in the conference with the separation games, Tech, K-State, Baylor, and Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I think so. And then we got OU going down to TCU as well. So this is going to be a really, really important week for us to learn. I think for instance, last week, Baylor going to Iowa State, I think we learned a lot about those teams there. We certainly learned a lot more about Baylor, who I was a little uncertain of after that BYU game in week 2. But yeah, I think this is going to be a week that we learn some of that. Oklahoma State, they're really good. They're in the top 10, but their schedule isn't really that great so far. They haven't really played anybody of significance. This is going to be that huge road test for them to go down to Waco and see what they can do against a really good Baylor team. TCU, again, schedule very light early on. They had Colorado and Tarleton State, and then the Iron Skillet game, obviously a big rivalry game. That's a good win for them, but how are they going to look against OU? How does OU bounce back after the loss to K-State? Those are all things. And then, of course, we're talking about Texas and West Virginia. If Texas is going to be in this mix, they got to win this game. And I'm curious to see how that plays out as well. But this is no doubt going to be a really, like you said, separation Saturday, so to speak, in the Big 12 to some degree.
Sam, thank you. Appreciate you jumping on with us. Always enjoy what you have on your Twitter timeline. And, of course, we appreciate you jumping on the show whenever you can.
And for those with an athletic sub, definitely check out that piece if you're interested in the going for it on fourth down and from Baylor to Tech. Really interesting and good stuff there, Sam. Good read.
No problem, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That's Sam Kahn, theathletic.com.